This is reading Wikipedia, and this is the original iMac G3. Well, actually, it's the second generation, but whatever. The iMac G3, originally released as just the iMac, as they all are when they're brand new, is a series of Macintosh personal computers developed by Apple under the tenure of Apple's interim CEO and co-founder, Steve Jobs, after his return to the financially troubled company, as in on the verge of going out of business. The iMac was a huge success for Apple, revitalizing the company and influencing competitors' product designs. It played a role in abandoning legacy technologies like the floppy disk, serial ports, and Apple Desktop Bus, also known as ADB, in favor of Universal Serial Bus, or as everyone calls it, USB. The product line was updated throughout 1998 until 2001 with new technology and colors, eventually being replaced by the iMac G4 and eMac, and the E stands for education with its no-frills white shell. History! Steve Jobs reduced the company's large product lines immediately upon becoming Apple's interim CEO in 1997. Towards the end of the year, Apple trimmed its line of Macs down from 10 or more distinct models, depending on how you look at it, to 4 models of the Macintosh G3, which included the iMac's immediate predecessor, a bastard computer, educational market exclusive called the Macintosh G3 All-in-One.
These things are ugly.
Having discontinued the consumer-targeted Performa series, which was basically their all-in-one desktop that took over for the original Macintosh form factor, Apple needed a replacement for the Performa's price point. The company announced the iMac on May 6, 1998, and began shipping on August 15, 1998. The original iMac used a PowerPC G3 or 750 processor. G3 refers to the third generation of PowerPC chips created by AIM, the alliance of Apple, IBM, and Motorola. So there were G1 and G2 chips that Apple was using, but obviously when the G3 Tower came out, they were using it like a brand, and same for the G4 and the G5. So there were a bunch of chips used during those generations, but the differences between them are too confusing for any average person to keep track of. But when the G4 came out, that was an event. So branding is important. I would see PowerMacs and LCs and Quadras and Centrises and Performa Towers, but Performas are the all-in-ones. What? And they also have PowerPC chips in them. So how is this different from a PowerMac? And then there's the Macintosh 2510. Are we doing Roman numerals here? Also, these are supposed to be the first centrist computers, but the Mac 2 used to be the expensive model, and Centrises are budget, but isn't that what LCs are? And then Centrises became Quadras, which already existed, and Quadras became expensive PowerMacs. So I guess nothing means anything. At the same time, I normalized the confusing in-speak that is computer jargon and saw aesthetic changes and simplified branding as advertising trickery. So I was skeptical of the iMac, but I was also 13, so I didn't know anything about making or selling computers. The iMac sold for $1,300 and shipped with Mac OS 8.1, which this is probably Mac OS 8, but whatever, and was soon upgraded to 8.5. It was continuously updated after its initial release. Aside from increasing specifications, processor speed, video RAM, and hard disk capacity, Apple replaced Bondi Blue with new colors. Throughout its lifespan, the iMac was released in a total of 13 colors and/or patterns. A later hardware update created a sleeker design. This second generation iMac featured a slot-loading optical drive, like this, as opposed to a tray that pops out, FireWire, like this. FireWire 400 had a hypothetical max speed of 400 megabits a second, but averaged more like 30, compared to USB 1.1, which this also has, that hypothetically could do 12 megabits a second, but really it was more like 0.7. And remember, a bit is 1/8 of a byte, so divide by 8, because we typically measure storage in megabytes, not megabits, so that's like 11 seconds to copy a 1 megabyte file, about this, versus less than a second with FireWire, which is still better than copying to a floppy drive. So for its time, it's not like USB was crap. It was an upgrade, and FireWire was meant to replace the large SATA connectors. Anyways, second generation iMacs have fanless operation, so the first generation tray loading iMacs do have a fan, also a slightly updated shape, and the option for airport wireless networking, meaning they didn't come with Wi-Fi, but you can add it. Apple continued to sell this type of iMac until March 2003, mainly to customers who wanted the ability to run the older Mac OS 9 operating system, even though you can run Mac OS 9 on a G4 iMac, so I think it has more to do with the G3 iMac being a popular, less expensive option, because the G4 had a flat panel LCD that made it more expensive than a CRT. The iMac CRT model was then targeted at the educational market and renamed to the iMac G3, and kept in production alongside its iMac G4 successor until the eMac was released. As Apple continued to release new versions of its computers, the term iMac continued to be used to refer to machines in its consumer desktop line. The I stands for Internet, by the way, but later on, I guess it meant I as in self, because the original iPod wasn't Internet connected, or at least that's what I as in I self always assumed. Design. The iMac was dramatically different from any previous mainstream computer. It was made of translucent Bondi Blue colored plastic and was egg-shaped around a 15-inch CRT display. The case included a handle, just like the original Macintosh, and the peripheral connectors were hidden behind a door on the right side of the machine. That door would disappear, by the way. Dual headphone jacks in the front complemented the built-in stereo speakers. I don't know if complimented is the right word, but it had 2 audio outs. That's unique. Danny Koster was the original designer of the product, and Johnny Ive helped further the process. The iMac G3's unique shape and color options helped ingrain itself into late 1990s and early 2000s pop culture. The iMac was the first computer to exclusively offer USB ports as standard, including as the connector for its new keyboard and mouse. A further radical step was to abandon the 3.5-inch floppy disk drive, which had been present in every Macintosh since the first in 1984. Apple argued that recordable CDs, the internet, and office networks were quickly making diskettes obsolete. However, Apple's omission generated controversy. At the time of the iMac's introduction, third-party manufacturers offered external USB floppy disk drives, often in translucent plastic to match the iMac's enclosure. They were also pushing 100 megabyte iOmega zip drives, which were way better than the 1.4 megabyte floppies. The problem I encountered, which I had a G4 by the way, was that all the computers at school were Windows PCs. I'm pretty sure all my take-home school stuff fit on one floppy disk, so I didn't need the space of this. I needed compatibility. My solution was to use my 7200 for the disk drive and had it networked to the G4, so I would just have to have 2 computers on when I wanted to use a floppy disk. But yeah, if you really wanted a floppy drive, it's not like you couldn't buy it. Apple had initially announced the internal modem in the iMac would operate at only 33.6 kilobits a second rather than the new 56 kilobit a second speed, but it was forced by consumer pressure to adopt the faster standard. At the time, I had a 28.8 kilobit modem and I got about 7 kilobits on average. So 1,000 kilobits is 1 megabit and a megabit is 1/8 of a megabyte, which is almost one of these. So the internet was slow. Let's just say it would take me about an hour to download something that fit on this, and that's assuming I didn't lose the connection during download, because then I'd have to start all over again. Components such as the front-mounted IRDA infrared sensor, like a TV remote, and the tray-loading CD-ROM drive were borrowed from Apple's laptop line, though the infrared was removed in the Revision C onwards. So this was meant for transferring files. It wasn't for the Apple remote, that came with all Macs for a while, or at least as far as I assume, starting in 2005. Remember this? So infrared on the G3 was like a very slow and finicky airdrop and only worked for niche wireless devices like the Newton. Although the iMac did not officially have an expansion slot, the first versions, revisions A and B, had a slot dubbed the mezzanine slot. It was only for internal use by Apple. Officially, that was for testing logic boards to make sure they worked, I guess. although a few third-party expansion cards were released for it. It's limited, but a graphics card, a TV tuner card, video out, FireWire, SCSI, and ADP expansion were things that were made for it. It was removed on revisions C and D, but you could DIY it back onto the logic board if you really wanted to, and slot-loading iMac G3s made it impossible to do that. The keyboard and mouse were redesigned for the iMac with translucent plastics and a Bondi Blue trim. Not sure if Bondi is a reference to a beach in Australia. Let's just say it is. The Apple USB keyboard was smaller than Apple's previous keyboards with white characters on black keys, both attributes that attracted debate. Say the smaller is the bigger debate. This is a G4 keyboard, also known as the Apple Pro keyboard, and it would also be bundled with later iMac G3s. It's a better keyboard, I like it, it's full size, they abandoned the multicolor thing, so this is what you were getting with all the later G3s, as in you couldn't get a keyboard from Apple, at least, that was the same color as your computer. The Apple USB mouse was mechanical with a round hockey puck design, which was derided as being unnecessarily difficult for users with larger hands or hands in general to use. In the year 2000, the Apple Pro mouse, and later renamed the Apple Mouse, became the one mouse that ruled all of Apple's hardware offerings. It was also known as the no button mouse.
Revision history.
First generation, tray loading. The first iteration of the iMac G3 featured a 15-inch, 13.8-inch viewable CRT display that was in the, for a long time, standard every computer resolution of 768 by 1024, a 233 megahertz processor, a 4 gigabyte hard drive, tray loading CD-ROM drive, 2 USB ports, a 56 kilobit modem. Again, the I stands for internet, and modems were usually add-ons that you plugged into the computer. Here it comes with it built-in. Built-in Ethernet, infrared port, built-in stereo speakers, and 2 headphone ports. It came exclusively in a translucent Bondi Blue plastic and was later retroactively known as Revision A. 2 months later, the iMac was updated with a better chip. This updated Revision B model stayed at 1300. The iMac had its infrared and mezzanine features removed with the introduction of the Revision C model. 2 months after that, dropping in price by $100, so it was $1,200. Hard drive capacity increased and a faster processor was added. The Bondi Blue color was discontinued and replaced by 5 new colors: strawberry, blueberry, lime, grape, and tangerine. A final update, Revision D, was released 4 months after that, which only increased processor speed. Second generation, slot loading. A year and 2 months after the original, Apple discontinued the tray-loading iMac. The new iMac built upon the Revision D success with a faster processor, twice the RAM, improvements to the built-in speaker system, a slot-loading optical drive, faster graphics chip, and slightly updated case, and support for Apple's 802.11b Airport wireless networking card. So it didn't come with Wi-Fi, but you could add it. This one has Wi-Fi. The iMac was joined by 2 additional standard configurations, the iMac DV, digital video, and iMac DV Special Edition, designed to support home movie editing. The iMac DV had a more powerful processor, a VGA out port, DVD-ROM drive, larger hard drive, and 2 FireWire ports for $1,300 in new shades of all 5 Revision D colors. It was called the DV because it featured the ability to capture DV video from DV tape in a DV camcorder or VCR through its FireWire connection. So back in the day, when you wanted to edit video, you had to copy over from tape. So you had to sit there and hit record on your footage and fast forward and rewind to the spots you wanted. I used one of these in a video production class. I also used a PC running Premiere. I didn't have a strong preference for either, but I do remember thinking that I was going to wait on getting a video camera until tape wasn't a thing. I just wanted video files that you could import and edit. Point and shoot cameras would come out that did really low quality video, but for me, this was 2002, and I wouldn't get a video camera till 2011. This video camera, by the way. And yeah, the iMac DV Special Edition doubled the RAM again and increased hard drive capacity to 13 gigabytes at 1,500 and was available in an exclusive graphite color. On July 19, 2000, Apple reduced the price of the entry-level iMac to $800. Hardware changes were minimal. The airport card slot was removed. For the base configuration, the USB mouse was replaced with the Apple Pro mouse. Remember this mouse? The better one? Another graphics chip upgrade, yada yada yada. They removed the DVD drive for just a CD drive. So anyways, there were lots of versions that were color or pattern coded. Some were meant to be budget minded and some were meant to be higher spec but still budget minded compared to the G4s. And then eventually the iMac G3 became the eMac. Also noteworthy is that the hard drive space went from 4 gigabytes only in the beginning to 10 to 60 gigabyte options in 2.5 years.
Perception and legacy.
The iMac G3 was well received, being considered one of Apple's most memorable products of its era. It was praised for its wide variety in color and was also praised for its translucent design and aerodynamic shape. As skeptical as I was, I did like the whole being able to see inside the machine thing. That would become a big Y2K trend. The inside of a computer is interesting. Why hide it?
Where'd all the files go?
Apple protected the distinctive iMac design with legal action against competing computer makers who attempted to imitate the iMac, such as the eMachine's E1. And they also won. Hardcore. It's interesting that before this, there really wasn't an objective reason to be on Team Apple other than hating Bill Gates, which is a thing that people are doing again, but not nearly as much as they did in the 90s. He was like what Mark Zuckerberg is now, the most universally disliked person in the now times, which, by the way, I wrote this script before Russia invaded Ukraine. Putin was my runner-up to Zuck. It's safe to say that Putin is the most disliked person on Earth right now, but whatever. Zuckerberg, the former most universally disliked person in the now times, Mark Zuckerberg. Everyone who isn't getting paid by him hates him. He's a Y2K tech bro taking the playbook of a 70s nerd. So, and remember, I'm talking about why I was on Team Apple in the 90s when they were really just losers. Why root for the losers? Because not wanting to use things associated with Microsoft was like not wanting to use things associated with Facebook. But the only reason you would use a Mac is because that's what you're exposed to. I didn't choose to be on Team Apple. My dad got a work-issued PowerBook 180, and it was way better than my Atari 800. I played Math Blasters, SimCity, and PGA Tour of Golf on it, learned the finer details of macOS, and came to prefer it. And then when Windows 95 came out, it was like Apple might go out of business. So that's when it became like a sport, where you root for the underdog, where you identify with the underdog. And the Mac versus PC arguing began. Bill Gates had a rising prominence in my mind. I had no idea who Guillermino was. I didn't know who Steve Jobs was. I knew who Bill Atkinson was for some reason, probably because of HyperCard. But really, what it came down to is that I was used to using this type of computer, and it could have gone away. And I would have had no choice but to live in a dystopian future where I had to buy a computer that was controlled by and supported the enemy. Like Vlad Putin. Imagine if Putin had a monopoly on operating systems and all computers had to run Vlad OS. That would be something to fight against.
We shall prevail.
So even though I was on Team Loser, I greeted the iMac with skepticism. Just an image change. It's like all those other G3s under the hood, but when I first used one in that video production class, it was memorable. That PC OEM running Premiere, yeah, I remember Premiere because Adobe was such a strong brand, but the computer was entirely forgettable. In April 2021, Apple announced the Apple Silicon Chip M1 based iMac that comes with 7 options of colors, with some tech and news media calling it a nostalgia bomb.